Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think we're about ready to get started. I am Janine Liberty. I'm the head of communications here at MIT Open Learning, and we're excited to welcome you today for today's Open Learning Talks event with Bill Bonvillian and Sanjay Sarma, whom I'll introduce in a moment. Looks like we've got a lot of people coming in from all over the world. We're very excited to see you. Thanks for joining our mailing list or following us on social media or however it is you found out about this talk. If it wasn't one of those two ways, please let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear how you learned about this event. So Sanjay Sarma, as many of you probably know, is Vice President for Open Learning at MIT, and Bill Bonvillian is Open Learning Senior Director for Special Projects and an MIT lecturer. Together, they've written a new book from MIT Press called Workforce Education, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I will introduce them and let them take over in a few minutes. A couple of housekeeping notes first. When I introduce Bill and Sanjay, they'll speak for a little while about their workforce education project and the book and its significance, especially in the post-pandemic world. And then for the last 20 minutes or so, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. There are a couple of ways to ask questions. So if you would like to ask your question aloud, please use the raise hand feature. You'll see that function at the bottom of your screen. Just raise your hand, keep it up, and we'll keep track of who is raising their hands. We'll add your name to the question queue that we're keeping track of. And when we get to the Q&A, we will promote you to panelists so that you can ask your question aloud. So we'll call on you when it's time to do that. I might also send you a private chat to let you know when you're being promoted. So keep an eye out for a note from me if you'd like to ask your question aloud. You can also submit your question just in the chat. My fellow moderator, Kate, and I are keeping track of questions that are put into the chat screen. So if you would rather not speak aloud and you're feeling camera shy, please feel free to put your questions there. If you have questions about any of this, please feel free to put it in the chat or send me a private message, and we'll be happy to help you out. With that, I will turn it over to Bill and Sanjay to talk about workforce education. So Sanjay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. I think we have, I think, Bill, you have me there. Can you put up the slides? Thanks, Bill. So we will talk today about, if you go to the next slide, Bill, about what's happening in the workforce. And first of all, it's hard to talk about the workforce today without remarking about what's happened with the coronavirus. The pandemic has really brought the situation to stark contrast. And in fact, it is the lower paid jobs, poor and working class, that are paid a disproportionate price. In the price in the United States, it's the number of unemployed is now more than 10 million. But what's even more sobering is the highest labor non-participation rate ever. And you know, the sectors that have been ravaged by this, whether it's retail or restaurants or even education, is taking a hit. In-person education, transportation, etc. It's a litany. If you go to the next slide, Bill. But the thing that's particularly sad about the situation is that before the coronavirus, it was the middle class taking a hit, and that was, of course, something that we were all concerned about. But the lower paying jobs were a little bit more fungible in the sense that people could go from one job to another. But with the coronavirus pandemic, the lower paid jobs have also taken a hit. And so really the greatest job mobility, or wage mobility, is, and the growth in demand is in higher wage jobs, which means that workforce education becomes a central element. This is not the first time the Western world, whether it's the United States or to some extent Canada, have faced this. Also UK. In the US and Canada had a version of this too. There was a GI Bill, and 16 million soldiers and sailors came home after World War II. In some ways, we have something very similar here, an opportunity to, and really a responsibility to take very large numbers of people and give them the tools to get better paying and higher quality jobs. So we go to the next slide, Bill. So this presentation is based on the final report of a project that was funded by Schmidt Futures, the book Workforce Education, a New Roadmap. Bill Bonvillian and I are the co-authors. The study was conducted out of the Office of Open Learning, MIT Open Learning, And it was triggered because we've been developing workforce education solutions for the last few years now, whether it's MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses through edX, or the MicroMasters, which is really targeting working adults, or boot camps, which is a way for people who take online courses to do something in person. And in 2018, we started our workforce education project with Schmidt Funding to try and figure out what the holes in the market were, where the needs were, what are the models, and how we could contribute, and how, frankly, the entire educational enterprise could contribute. So over to you, Bill, for the next slide.
So what's this workforce education challenge that we're facing? We've got a big disconnect in the US between work and learning. Other countries make that a smooth transition. We don't. Our education system is very disconnected from potential job opportunities. We've got disinvestment from both government and employers in workforce ed. We've got programs in our federal government that are disconnected. The Labor Department training programs don't reach higher technical skills. They don't reach incumbent workers. The Education Department programs focus on college, not on workforce needs. And the two programs are really not in mesh, right? They're not connected. We've got vocational education systems in secondary schools that, starting about 20 or 30 years ago, largely got dismantled. We have underfunded community colleges that don't have the resources to provide for the new advanced fields, and that have too low completion rates. We've got colleges and universities who don't think that workforce education is their problem. They're disconnected from these issues. We're missing lifelong learning. We've got underfunded advanced technical programs at organizations like the National Science Foundation and the 15 new advanced manufacturing institutes that aren't at a scale that's going to really be big enough to change the problem, although they can make contributions. We've got a broken labor market information system, and we've got, legacy sectors to deal with. It's very hard to make change in legacy sectors, but we're facing a series of legacy sector challenges. And it's not only coronavirus. We've got long-standing job quality problems in the US. We've had increasing economic inequality, not economic convergence. This has been a festering problem now for more than a decade. MIT economist David Otter describes the problem as a barbell. On one bell of the bar, we've got a growing upper middle class. On the other bell, we have had a growing lower end services sector. The bar in between, the historically very, very strong American middle class, has been thinning out, and too many in that middle class are being pushed to that lower end sector. And we've got technological advances, particularly from IT, that are putting many quality jobs out of reach for those who don't have the proper training and skills. So Sanjay and I looked at three large sectors in the US that amount to 30% of US employment. Every sector in the US has different workforce needs, has different workforce education kinds of systems. So you need to understand at the sectoral level, and we looked at three big ones. First, we looked at manufacturing. Now, manufacturing historically in the US was a very important pathway into the middle class, particularly for men who didn't have college. But median income is down for them, for those without high school diplomas or without college, or with college diplomas in some college. Median income is down quite significantly. Manufacturing employment fell by 1/3, by 5.8 million jobs between 2000 and 2010. And as Sanjay mentioned, we have this high overall labor non-participation rate. Now, coronavirus hits some sectors, for example, aircraft production, but a lot of manufacturing is still in pretty good shape despite the virus, but we need more resilient supply chains. We've learned a lot about locked in supply chains that can't change and can't adjust, that are too stuck in globalized economies and can't shift to meet immediate needs. That's been a big lesson from coronavirus. We may be seeing some reshoring, But manufacturing means new manufacturing technologies entering to create that kind of resiliency, which means new skills for the workforce. Overall, the manufacturing sector, which lost a lot of jobs, stabilized in the post-2010 period to around 12 million jobs in the US. And that workforce is aging. So there's going to be a big new need. Probably 2 million or more manufacturing jobs are going to open up because of retirements in this coming decade. So there's going to be a significant need in this sector. But it's not just people. The whole sector is going through a lot of upskilling. We're going to need to undertake advanced manufacturing to stay competitive. That's going to require new, higher skills. Sanjay? You're on mute.
Yep. Retail is a very interesting sector. In the United States, by 2005, retail was already somewhat in trouble because it was 6 times overbuilt on a per capita basis compared to all European nations, and even compared to Canada. It was 50% overbuilt. So there was a crash coming anyway, and the tipping point was reached in 2008 with the economic crash. And after that, retail went into a new mode, which is one of discount retail. The idea was to try and minimize the cost of labor and maximize the throughput of goods. Now, this model was fine because another wave hit at about the same time. Although Amazon started in the late 90s, online was really coming into its own in the mid 2000s. And so now the Walmarts and the Targets and the JC Penney's of the world and the Sears of the world, the last 2 of which are now bankrupt, were taking on Amazon. And so the focus was on cost, and the workforce was not considered the highest priority from a sophistication perspective. It was more about physically moving things around. But as warehousing became more important with the online onslaught, more and more jobs started shifting because even the traditional bricks and mortar companies started going into something called omni-channel. The idea of omni-channel is you buy online, you pick up at the store. So that was, the Macy's, these companies, that was their reaction to the Amazons. Or you buy in the store and it gets delivered to your home. Or in some cases, the store is simply a showroom, like with Bonobos, and you look at the product, you buy it, but it's actually shipped to your home. And the warehouse became more central in these situations. And so more and more jobs are moved to warehousing. But there's also a gender shift because retail jobs, shop floor jobs have more women, and warehousing have more men. But the thing is that as omnichannel is taken off, and other models have taken off. So, for example, another model is like the Apple Genius Bar, where the salesperson isn't just operating a checkout counter. In fact, the Genius Bar, Apple stores don't have checkout counters, but the salespeople and the people behind the Genius Bar counter are exceptionally knowledgeable about the product, and they're providing everything from advice to debugging to sort of product suggestions. So what that means is that it's a far cry from the sort of the dumbed down staff model. Staff starts playing offense and becomes very knowledgeable. And in addition, there are other technological improvements. For example, Bluetooth beacons in stores and self-checkout and things like that. So what that means is a sudden movement in retail where the worker is no longer just an automaton, but in fact a very knowledgeable person, again, increasing the demand for upskilling, training, and education. Back to you, Bill.
So a third sector, and I'll just summarize this briefly because we're all familiar with this, but healthcare is a growing sector. We've got an aging population with increasing healthcare demands. At the same time, we've got a fleet of new medical technologies that's entering that workplace, creating all kinds of new professional kinds of positions. So the results are many more jobs with more skill needs. So the need for more training systems, There are barriers here. The established health professions tend to limit entry. And here's where online entry and online may play an important kind of role. The upskilling across all these sectors, as you can see, is ongoing, right? So jobs at this time increasingly go to the college educated. And the requirement of having some college has really replaced high school as a core job credential in the US. Is that college credential meaningful? Does it stand for work know-how? It's really a default credential, but we don't have a substitute credentialing system for it. And meanwhile, we've got growing information technology that's demanding all kinds of new skills. The result is new higher middle skill jobs that require education beyond high school. Yet only 1/3 of Americans over age 25 have 4-year college degrees. So we're going to need a new workforce education system. Those folks who haven't gotten those college degrees are not going to go back for 4 years to ivy-clad halls and get them. We've got to have a workforce education system that reaches them, that reaches this community that's not been going to college. So what's the workforce education system? Where are the gaps? Where do we need attention? We've got a weak labor market information system underlying this whole sector, right? Workers don't know what skills they need. Educators don't know what skills to educate for. Employers don't know what skills the workers have. We've got a weak information system. Strong markets have strong information systems. We have weak labor markets with weak labor market information systems behind them. We need to change that. The transition from school to work, as we noted earlier, is a big problem in the US. You know, contrasted with many European countries and other countries around the world, the US has got a particularly weak decentralized transition problem. Our high school diplomas are not enough, yet the US largely ended vocational education 20 and 30 years ago. Our community colleges, a key asset here, are underfunded, and the completion rate of these community colleges is too low. Our colleges aren't engaged in workforce preparation, and we don't have a certification system. We don't have a way of having certificates that show what your work know-how is, your job know-how is, that's readily available and transferable. And just, we have it in some sectors, but many we don't. And as I noted, our education and labor programs are disconnected. The Labor Department focuses on important sectors like the unemployed and the underemployed and the displaced, but they're not focused on upskilling the incumbent workforce. And they're not focused on the new skills that people are going to need. And the education department, again, is college oriented. It's really not workforce oriented. So those are some of the gaps and the issues in the system. Sanjay?
So the elephant in the room, of course, is online education. COVID, if there's one slender silver lining to COVID, it is that, to the tragedy that is COVID, is that, we've learned that online is a very powerful thing. Of course, what we're seeing right now is not true online education. What we're seeing right now is Zoom University. Proper online education is pre-recorded videos, asynchronously delivered short videos, and of the type that you see on edX or Coursera or Khan Academy. Zoom lectures are a jury rigged sort of heroic action, but that's not really what online should be. But if you do online right, it's a way to really scale up and meet the challenges, not just from coronavirus, but for workforce training. And in fact, what's happening today with the augmented reality and virtual reality is another game changer. AR and VR seem like something in the distant future, but many smartphones already have it. And in fact, Bill and I would make the argument that augmented reality has been around for 90 years in the form of flight simulators, which are in fact augmented reality. And then you add to it computer gaming, simulation, digital tutors, which is an AI system that acts as a tutor to train people to get better. Sort of like in computer flight simulators or computer golf, but taken to real vocations. These are all in around the corner, and some of them are already here. And then another thing that's going to happen is online credentialing. So the idea is that you don't just get, a degree is a very monolithic thing, but imagine if you could take as you do with MOOCs, a 6-week course and learn about some topic. Can you get a credential for it? And one of the things we're doing at MIT, in fact, we're doing all the things listed here, but particularly is digital credentials, a blockchain-based certification system. So if you get a credential, you can put it on your LinkedIn page, and it's an employer clicks on it, they can see what the credential is and also be confident that the credential is valid without having to call the granting institution as we do today to see if it's valid. So go to the next slide, Bill. So EdTech, I should say, that is not just about reaching people who are far away or taking courses at their own pace at home. EdTech is also, it also enables just a fundamental new pedagogy on campus, because the fact of the matter is that before COVID confiscated the privilege of being together, we really wasted a lot of our time in in-person time in lectures. And what's going to happen in the future when we return is a much more massive adoption of what is called the flipped classroom. So, for example, we know the science of learning tells us that about a 10-minute learning chunk is about optimal. Beyond that, there's cognitive overload. You can do that with online. You really can do that with a lecture. So why not just do all that online, and then use the classroom to do active learning, hands-on learning, generative learning. We're actually designing something. It's all called blended learning, and you can make it even more realistic with augmented reality, virtual reality, new prototyping technologies. So, and then there are other things you can do in the online space. You can do all sorts of cognitive tricks that you can do online that you can't do in person. So the basic idea is that EdTech is not just, it also helps with regular teaching. And in fact, in our view, it's here to, in my view, personally, it's here to stay, because our in-person teaching is going to change the way we use EdTech to do the things that's better. But we do the coaching, the context, the curiosity, the hands-on, all that stuff in person. And we reclaim the time that when we are able to get back together, we reclaim and value that time, in-person time in the classroom a lot more. Go to the next slide, Bill. So this is a notional graph. The labels there, so think of it this way. We believe that the social contract of educational institutions will change with society. And it'll change because then educational institutions need to play a bigger role in workforce training and upskilling and continuing education. Now, not every institution can do all the things listed there. They can probably do a pretty good job of working with community colleges, other local schools to organize delivery frameworks or to develop online platforms. edX, for example, is open source. University can download it and help a local college implement it. But take MIT, for example, are we good at, we can probably teach a high-level course on the physics of welding, but are we going to be really good at teaching welding to technicians? Probably not. So if you look at this as MIT, I give us a low score in our ability to deliver that. But universities, in our view, need to figure out what they're going to be good at in this new social contract, and then interdigitate with other entities, whether it's local community colleges, vocational schools, skill schools, and build partnerships so that between the two of them, they can achieve a 6 in terms of, or whatever the highest number is, in terms of enabling proper workforce education. But this introspection is important to figure out what universities can do and how they can play a part in this. Back to you, Bill.
So what are the policy implications here? We're going to need, as Sanjay just laid out, new education technologies. They're going to need to be developed and nurtured. We're going to need to bring VR and AR, gaming, digital tutoring, the suite, if we're going to get to the kind of scale that we need in workforce education. There's a huge scaling issue problem. We got a lot of upskilling we've got to do. We've got to get to that scale. Online is going to be a tool to do that. And look, technologies like VR and AR are going to be big enablers of hands-on learning, which is crucial in workforce education. They're going to be able to help. We're going to need short courses. people are not going to be able to spend 2 years getting a degree. They're going to have to, they're in the workforce often. They're going to need shorter, more focused kinds of programs that take 10 weeks, 15 weeks, maybe 20 weeks, right? And they need credentials for these. They can build groups of credentials and move those towards degrees, stack them over time. That's, I think, going to be a crucial new approach to this system to make it workable for the great numbers of people we're going to need to reach. We're going to need community college programs that reach not only community college students, but also incumbent workers that also reach high school students, right? Community colleges are very flexible mechanisms. They can be open 52 weeks a year. They can work 24/7, right? 7 days a week. Let's use that flexibility and build programs that reach a mix of learners that are in different learning circumstances, but not only traditional college, community college students, but they can serve as magnets for reaching incumbent workers in this upskilling, but also high school students. We're going to need to break down that work-learn barrier in the United States. We're going to need apprenticeships or internships or co-ops or what we could call apprenticeship light. We're going to need to bring employers into this mix so that you've got coordinated programs that involve education institutions, employers, as well as workers and students, so that they're in a combined and kind of joint effort, building towards breaking down this work-learn barrier. We're going to need to increase the community college completion rate. And there's new programs, and we talk about some of them in the book, that show the way to lead to this. There's going to be a very important role for states in effect, reestablishing technical programs at the secondary school level. We're going to need technical high schools, or at least more comprehensive programs than existing high schools that are stronger in teaching workforce skills, as well as connecting to these work-learn opportunities. There has to be an expanded employer role, as I suggested, for these apprenticeship type programs, but also for training and standards. They're going to need to be designing the curriculum so that they're getting the skilled workforces they need. They're going to need to be connected much better. We're going to need new advanced curriculum. And this can be an important university kind of contribution. With advanced manufacturing, we're going to need all kinds of new advanced manufacturing skills. With IT, similarly. And IT is entering many, many parts of the workforce, as we all know. We're going to need to unify at the state level our kind of divided federal education and labor programs. The states can reconnect these and bring those labor programs and the education programs into tandem and working collaboratively together. It's harder for the feds to do this, but this is a role that the states could take on, and we're seeing some, including our state of Massachusetts, that is already doing this. And we need new labor market information systems that are much more transparent and accessible to employers, to workers, and education institutions, so they know what to teach for. So some recommendations. Let's do this trifecta, right? Let's create community colleges that are reaching all these three groups of workers. Let's start to really work on apprenticeship light, connections to between school and work. We can bring on youth apprenticeships where high school students start to get job opportunities in addition to school. We can do better funding for community colleges and improve the completion rate. They're going to need better funding to be able to develop and to implement these new upskilling kinds of programs. We're going to need these short programs that are connected to degrees. We're going to need regional workforce efforts by groups of employers with state and education institution involvement. We're going to need integrated federal programs, and this can be at the state level. We're going to need new labor market information systems. And as Sanjay spelled out, there's a real opportunity for scaling through new education technologies if they're used right. And that'll be a key to expanding the mix that we're going to have to reach with workforce education. So in summary, coronavirus brought home the importance of workforce education in addressing our inequality. The question now is, are we going to act? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Bill, if you're done with your slides, there it goes. All right, we're going to transition over to the Q&A portion in a couple of minutes. So just a reminder to everyone that if you would like to ask a question, you can either use the raise hand function if you'd like to speak your question aloud, or put it in the chat. Sanjay has already answered a few questions in the Q&A because he's a multitasker extraordinaire. Just to sort of get things started, I have a couple of questions for you guys. In writing the book, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just your experience of writing this book and embarking on this research project and deciding what the book was going to be. You know, how did you decide what sectors to focus on, what content to include, and what to lead on the cutting room floor? Did you fight about it? Were you surprised by what you learned? Just talk a little about the book itself for a bit.
Bill,
All right.
why don't you go ahead?
There was no fighting, right? It was a huge task, and you know, it was fun, you know, diving into it with Sanjay with all of his expertise on education and learning, which taught me a lot. You know, some people describe themselves as model collectors. You know, we became model collectors, only we were collecting education models, kind of looking around the country in these wonderful halcyon pre-coronavirus days and visiting new programs and seeing what some really creative community colleges or employers are up to. It was an eye-opening experience. And we got to see a lot of new stuff, and it became very, very real to us. We were able to connect real people with the ideas that we were starting to see developing. So it was a wonderful learning experience, frankly, for me. And I know that's true for Sanjay.
Yeah, no, maybe I'll also add that I like the way Bill has put it in the past, that if you ask the typical American what high school looks like, they know the answer. You ask them what college education looks like, they know the answer. But if you say to the typical American, what is workforce education? How do you get educated when you're 35 and you want to learn something? There is no clear answer. That's a problem. And we were sort of dabbling in this space. I'm an expat myself, so I wanted to understand it more. Bill's done a lot of work in manufacturing. He actually wrote a book on advanced manufacturing in the Manufacturing Institutes in 2017. And I worked in manufacturing, and I know retail, and Bill was looking at healthcare and looking at policy. So it sort of came together very naturally in pursuit of this report, actually, particularly.
And we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'll start reading those in a minute. But while I'm queuing those up, I wanted to just talk just a little bit more about sort of watching the pandemic unfold and how it has affected the workforce generally and made even more glaring the need for different workforce training and education. You couldn't possibly have predicted the coronavirus when you set out to write this book, but as you were saying, many of the key points and lessons have only become more significant in the wake of the pandemic. And can you comment a little on what it means to you that the pandemic has compounded existing issues rather than creating a larger number of surprising new challenges?
I'll give you an example just to kick things off, and really Bill should address this in greater detail, but here we are, you know, we've all become Zoom experts. Many of us taught ourselves to use Zoom. Just today, I've used WebEx, I've used Teams. You know, it's a new skill, right? But we are blessed in being in roles that are sort of knowledge-based, and we can do this. And even within knowledge-based roles, I mean, print advertising is probably taking a backseat to digital advertising, right? But then, if you go a step further, if you take, for example, nursing, you know, you saw what happened with earlier in the pandemic, the need for the perceived need that we need to learn to more nurses had to operate ventilators, and you know, people are sort of flocking. In fact, edX put together a free ventilator course, and they had 100,000 people sign up in very short order. So this pandemic, if nothing else, has, I think, created what I call knowledge refugees, people having to learn new skills as we get displaced from our old world to this new world. So it's actually, but then the lack of venues has become apparent too. And we've seen this in edX and Coursera and other places. But Bill probably has other insights as well on this.
Yeah, let me share a few thoughts. I mean, we both talked about this a lot. The long-term trends of economic inequality were upon us, right? And creating a kind of division in the United States society that we had not seen before, you know, perhaps somewhat in the 1890s, but just a new kind of class split that's, I think, very dangerous to the democracy in a country that has lived off and entirely relied on a strong middle class. We began to erode it. And, you know, the economists are predicting, many economists are predicting a very robust recovery from this coronavirus as it, you know, unfolding in the course of the year. And let's definitely hope that's the case. But within that recovery, I think both of us are worried, and Sanjay noted this at the beginning of the talk, that there are some people in sectors that are, you know, largely lower wage services sectors. They are going to get even further left behind here if we're not careful. So, and that's a big population, right? And we're going to have to, we needed as a society to find the tools to strengthen our middle class. And I think workforce education is one of those critical tools that we don't have and we have to build. But the coronavirus just underscores how profound that need is going to be. And, you know, this can be a healthy, robust recovery, and we can help people move towards quality jobs, or we can have further division in our society. And that's what we're up against right now.
And maybe I'll just, sorry, just one more thing. You know, I've joked in the past, although it's a bit, well, that the 21st century really began in 2021. It did not begin in 2000 or 2001, because we've just been through a massive digital transformation. You know, Amazon was around in the 90s, Google was around, right? 2001 didn't change that much. 2008 was a shock, but we were still operating the same way. But this last year, we've been through a massive societal transformation. And a lot of people are going to find themselves on the lee side of that transformation. And they're going to have to figure out how to sort of clamber over the mountain and come to the other side. So.
All right, we've got a critical mass of questions coming in. I'm going to turn my video off now so that you guys don't all have to watch me reading aloud as I read these questions. First question coming in from Shigeru Miyagawa, our very own MIT faculty member. He says, this reminds me of James Besson's EU work on ATMs. When ATMs were introduced in the 1970s, bank tellers had to change from money handlers to personal advisors selling investments and loans. This change was made without online education. Why is online education crucial today? Does it democratize access?
I think it's the pace, Shigeru. First of all, good to see Shigeru there. We usually work in the same office and live about a mile from each other. We haven't seen them in a year. But it's the pace of change. The well-known, that great example of yours, there was time. Here suddenly in a year, people have to fundamentally, rapidly retool. I think, and even leaving COVID aside, the pace of change is so rapid. I mean, data scientist was not a job category that existed 10 years ago. 2008, it didn't exist, not 10 years ago, 12 years ago, right? It's the rage now. Instagram marketing, that's a job that didn't exist 5 years ago. So it's just the pace of change. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you and I were both involved in the Work of the Future project at MIT and contributed to it and wrote a piece for it. You know, I think we learned, you know, a lot from that project. We learned that, yeah, the change ongoing is profound, but the pace of actual implementation of that change is slower. So that, you know, it's not as if robots are going to take our jobs tomorrow and there'll be no work left, right? This is like all technological change. It takes place, it gets spread over time. So we're starting to see all these changes, but the actual implementation is frankly on a scale that becomes manageable. There is going to be change. I think we learned from that report and that study, but it's not as if work is going to disappear. There is going to be plenty of work, and it's going to be, some jobs will be lost. Many, many more jobs will be changed and transformed and require additional skills and know-how. And then there will be new jobs that will be created as a result of these new technologies. So it's going to be a complex mix. So change is upon us and will change many things. And we're seeing dramatic change. But in terms of, you know, wrecking work, I don't think that's in the cards. We've got some time to figure out this, right? And to get our population with the kind of skills that are going to be needed to cope and thrive in an atmosphere where we need, you know, more upskilling to enable those kinds of quality jobs that are going to get created. Does that sound right to you, Sanjay?
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shigeru. Another one in from Orally Jean, I hope you're pronouncing that correctly, and I apologize if not. She asks, how can we leverage experience from other countries to better develop a new model of education in the USA?
One of the things that we see in European countries, such as the Nordic countries, Germany and Switzerland, is a very robust apprenticeship system. And it's not new, it's quite old. And certainly that's something that this country would benefit from. And if you take the Swiss system, even in high school, students are exposed to work. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. And in fact, in Massachusetts, unlike in the rest of this country, in the United States, there's a very robust vocational school system. There are 27 vocational schools in Massachusetts. I think it's 27. One of them actually literally a stone's throw from my house here in Lexington, Massachusetts. So those are some models that we could adopt. The other thing I'll say is Singapore has been working on, and I think they've implemented a way in which citizens as a benefit get coupons to take online courses or upskilling courses. So it becomes a part and parcel of some of the incentive systems. But I think that those are existing systems, and the Singapore model is a little newer. But I do think that there's a lot more that can be done, and I'm not sure all the models are already decided. What do you think? What do you think about that, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, we're early in the game and looking at workforce education. We've had it in the construction trades for a long time, but it's new to the rest of the economy. I mean, one of the things we took a close look at as one of the models that Sanjay and I wrote about is a program in South Carolina, a community college, a technical college called Trident Tech. It's an expanding workforce in manufacturing in that part of South Carolina around Charleston, and new employees were arriving, and new supplier systems were part of that growing manufacturing sector, and they had a big workforce training problem. There just weren't enough skilled workers in the region. So a group of 6 small companies, went to the local community college and said, look, let's try one of these apprenticeship programs. Let's see what can happen. Let's start it as a youth apprenticeship program, starting in the 2nd year of high school. And they created a program in very short order with Trident Tech, brought in the Chamber of Commerce, which helped in doing some fundraising and organizing for it, brought in additional employers, created a working group of significant number of employers who were willing to commit to this. And they were the major funders here because they're going to be hiring and employing the students. But what it created was a pathway starting in your junior year in high school. And, Americans in this audience know how disruptive high school can be, right? It can be a somewhat destructive experience for all too many. Instead, these kids as juniors in high school, they're in their high school in the morning, and their employers are telling them, hey, you got to take math and science. And then they go to the community college, the technical college at Trident Tech, and then they're taking their skill courses that are relevant to their workplace, right? Manufacturing, healthcare, series of other fields. Then they go to their employer in the later part of the afternoon, where there's working and being quite well paid. So a high school student who's making, $10 to $20 an hour, and it scales up, they're kings of the hill in their high school environment. But most importantly, right, they're out of that high school environment in that community college environment where the average age is 29. These are adults that they're hanging out with in an adult culture, interested in finding new skills. And then they're in a workplace with an even older and more mature environment of 30 to 45-year-olds, say, where they're just in a much more mature environment, absorbing not only a skill opportunity, which can help them move ahead and earning money, but they're also in a much more kind of mature world outlook that really helps them get through this pathway into a world of work. So these are the kinds of programs that we need to replicate. It's especially adapted. It's very different than European programs, but it's one that could fit the United States at a larger scale. And look, the state of South Carolina is one of the few states in the country with a statewide apprenticeship program. There's some real models there to be looked at.
Fantastic. We've got a few more minutes. I think time for maybe 2 more questions, maybe 3. Claude Canizares asks, the private sector industry would seem to be a critical factor in defining skills, creating apprenticeships, and so on. How do we energize them to be more active and creative, creating a solution? And then related to that, somebody else asked, what is the relationship between the government and the private sector in this area? And how would that need to change to make workforce education training programs more effective?
Philosophically, I think the private sector could play a huge role. I do have one concern, which I'll come to, but I think that there's clearly an incredible opportunity, including what Bill was describing just now. The private sector can help education institutions figure out where the jobs are, what skills are necessary, provide even hands-on training, apprenticeships is an extremely important role. One thing to be wary of is that the private sector, and this is not some, I mean, I'm sort of a broad statement. It's not meant to be prejudicial towards the private sector in any specific way. But, you know, really the incentive there is for the first job. The private sector is looking for the person to work in a particular job. And where the public sector, where nonprofits, where education institutions come in, is they're really preparing a person for life. And you have to balance those two things. But having said that, I do agree that the private sector has a huge role. I will say that there was also an earlier question about employers playing a role in education. And yes, in fact, that was something that, in fact, has gone down in this country. And actually, Bill, not just in this project, but previously has written about it.
Yeah, let me add a couple of thoughts. You know, we've got a big demographics issue in our workforce, right? We've got changing demographics, and we've got, you know, smaller oncoming generations. And that is going to put a lot of pressure on employers who already face pressure to find workers with the skills that they need, which are increasingly kind of upskilled kinds of positions. They're also going to have a demographics challenge on that. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on employers to really re-enter the world of, you know, of training and education and play a more substantive kind of role. Help in creating these kind of youth apprenticeship programs is one of many examples, right? Be involved with community colleges and helping design curriculum that gives them the kind of upgraded skill sets that they're going to need to make their workplace work. So I think there will be economic pressure on employers to kind of re-enter the education system if they're going to get the workforces they're going to have with the new kind of levels of skills that are going to be required for them to thrive.
By the way, on that note, Jonathan, McManaman Balano asks about, you know, will the private sector get back into the game, and why did they stop in the first place? I think that the private sector is recognizing this is an issue. So in fact, Starbucks, for example, is offering education to all its baristas and employees. Google and Amazon and Apple are getting more into education. So there's hopefully the pendulum's swinging a little bit. Boeing and other companies are more involved now. So
Moving in a good direction. One person asks, Leanne asks, what do you think of STEM schools providing an associate's degree as part of an extended high school experience? And does that relate the ideas that you're talking about in these different sectors?
I lost the STEM schools, I'm sorry, offering what?
STEM schools providing associate's degrees as part of an extended high school experience. Is that related to the idea of apprenticeships, would you say?
You know,
I mean, you know, yeah, go ahead, Bill, please.
Yeah, I'll just extend the comment I was making earlier about the South Carolina apprenticeship programs, right? Those kids, when they finish high school, they have also completed a year, because of their attendance at community colleges, they've completed a year towards their associate degree, right? So they've got a very clear pathway on. And, you know, we're obviously seeing a lot of programs that better link college and community college programs with high schools, and we're going to see more. You know, the high school dividing line versus a community college or college dividing line is pretty arbitrary. There's a lot of fluidity and know-how and knowledge and experience and background. And as we move towards more of a system that has more badges and credentials that are tied to workforce knowledge, I think we're going to see more fluidity in that relationship between colleges and high schools, community colleges and high schools. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. right? There's the horizontal line between high school and community colleges that can be blurred, but there's also a vertical line actually between education and work, and that needs to be blurred as well. So it's like a triangle. And if you blur the edges of the triangle, which is basically what the Swiss have done, then it's a win-win.
All right, I think we've got time for just about one more question. Caroline asks, is there a common language or thread such as, skills, a currency of skills, critical skills for 2022 in each of the industries you're talking about that will enable the future of work and education delivery models that we can all start to foster and adapt today? Some of the, a lot of what you're talking about require systemic change at, in the private sector, in schools, at the government level. Is there something that we as individuals can start doing to start taking this seriously?
Well, first of all, if it's the same Caroline, hi Caroline, Caroline used to work at Open Learning and is amazing. I would say that unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a Wild West. In other words, for example, data science, right? How do you define what it takes to be a data scientist? Well, finally, after 10 years of mucking around, we figured it out, sort of. But a lot of these jobs, we need to, it is a Wild West, and there needs to be some way to systematize what it means to have a skill. What are the competencies you need to show? There's a question about assessment. How do you assess whether the person has a skill? This is a research area. It's a consensus building area. We need regulation, not too much regulation. It could be sort of in industry bodies, but we really need to sort out the Wild West a little bit.
And let me just add, it is a Wild West, and there's probably several 100,000 credentials out there that are very hard to sort and understand. But there is an opportunity here. We have some critical institutions in place, community colleges among them, that can be building blocks towards a new system. And what we've tried to do in this book is identify, a series of 9 models that could really bring significant change into the way we do workforce education, or really make much more of a system of workforce education that people understand, they can see, they can relate to and participate in. It becomes much more transparent and clear to them what the opportunity spaces may be. So Sanjay is absolutely right. We're going to have to hack our way through the Wild West of credentialing and skills assessment. That's not going to be simple. But there are models out there that I think that we can impose that could lead us in some very important new directions. So we try to set those out in the book.
Fantastic. Well, Sanjay has a hard stop because he's got another meeting at 4. So we're going to wrap it up here. I want to take another moment to thank everyone for coming. Please check out the book, check out the articles that we posted in the chat. The recording from this talk is going to be up in a few days as soon as it's captioned. Sanjay, Bill, any last words?
If you'll send us, Janine, the content of the chat, we'll try and respond to some of the additional questions we weren't able to reach.
That's a great idea, Bill. Yes, we will post the recorded video as well as a blog post with some more answered questions as soon as we're able.
Good.
Yeah, and my only comment is that I think we are sort of in-person monolithic. I think a lot of what we need to do in the future is one or both of online granular, everything from the content to the credential.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. Thanks for taking the time, and thank you all again for joining us. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.